It's so much fun to be here today with Neal Daedalus. That's how he's known around here as Neal Daedalus. And thank you for joining me, Neal. And I understand that you work in the software industry and you have an idea that you call the float theory of transcendentals. So I'm pretty interested in talking about this. So give us a little bit of your background and how you came up with this idea and what you're doing with it.
Sure. So thanks, Karen. So I've known you for probably about I probably watched you on and off for 3 or 4 years, and more so in the last year as I've gotten more involved with the corner. And I consider Chad one of my closest friends now, and other people in the corner too. But I think it was you who commented on yeah, well, it was one of videos with Chad, I think, or maybe it was Noah. It was probably Noah Foxman, and you said something like, I want to hear more about this float theory of transcendentals. And I never had framed it precisely in that way, but it was a really good, simple framing. So that's your branding, not mine, but it's good. I approve. And yeah, so I've worked in the software industry for, I'm older than I look, for 17 years. I was an unusual kid in that I was born from the time I was born in 85. I had two computers in my household, Apple II and an Amiga. My father was a programmer. My older half brother, now deceased, came in second in the math Olympiad in high school, like absolutely brilliant in mathematics. And I could never even compete at their, not even close to their level. I remember my freshman year at college, I took the Intro to Computer Science course because I figured I'd go into computer science too. And I got a B plus in that intro course. And that was the course that math majors dreaded and they didn't want to take. And I was like, oh, if I can do that, then I can go into computer science. And then you get to the second class, which is called data structures. And I got a D in data structures. And after that, I'm like, I don't think this is for me. And because I couldn't translate what was on the screen, the programmatic language, to what I wanted the system to do. And I would always run into like, you missed a semicolon or you missed the bracket, or all these syntax errors drove me nuts. And so like when I started in my job, I am in the software industry, but I do mostly process engineering and working with clinicians. And but I was always hesitant to work with software directly. And then starting around 2017, when everything we commonly talk about blew up, I had this idea for a story. It was a story in particular. And as I got to know both Peterson and Carl Jung more, I realized as I was writing this story, I realized like, oh, this is just a story of individuation. That's what this is. And it's the same thing as Dante, although, Dante is his poesis is much, much higher than, my own. But as I was writing this story and I was realizing this, I realized to myself that like kids do not read stories, or not even kids, even young adults, especially young men. I think young women are still reading fiction more so than young men. And the reason that young men are not reading fiction is because we're embroiled in this virtual space that we call video games. And that, so I really started, and when I was a kid, like some of the best stories that I partook in, you could say, were from video games. Not all of them, but I would say even a majority were from video games. So it's this, I'll call it an art form. It's this art form that's a generational divide away, in that the older generation really has no sense of that because it wasn't an art form that existed. Uh, and in those formative years in adolescence and even before that in early adulthood, like the stories that imprint there tend to be the stories that stay with people, I think, the most, as it was for me. And so there's this simultaneous technology that has emerged, called video games, and I can explain what I see different between video games and say conventional storytelling, and the mediums that we've considered in conventional storytelling. And then at the same time that I was writing this thing, I was realizing, oh, my target audience, young men, they don't read anymore. They play video games. So then the dreaded D from data structures comes back to haunt me and be like, oh man, I have to try to learn how to make a game. I have no clue how to even begin. And so what was ironic is I was on target to finishing the story in May of 2020. And I was dreading three things. One, I was dreading it's be too hard. I can't figure it out. Second thing I was dreading is like, oh, maybe I figure it out, but it's really boring and I hate it. And then I finish this story and then what? And there was a third thing. Um, Maybe it was just those two things. There was a third thing. I forget. So I was dreading even the
Maybe the third
transition.
thing, if I translate that to painting, the third thing would
Mhm.
be, what if it's successful and I can't figure out how I did it and I won't be able to do another one? That's a really
I wa
scary one.
Yeah, I wasn't even vaguely thinking about the possibility of success at that point. That was such a foreign, yeah. Yeah, it was like my number one failure in my life up to that point was um yeah, or in my early adulthood, I would say, was that failure to reach the standards of my brother, my father in computer science excellence, let's say. And because my brother, he was the lead programmer at Vonage when voice over internet was a very new thing, and both of them just brilliant mathematical minds.
Well, could I
Um,
ask you
yeah,
what
sure,
might be a very touchy question? I
yeah,
don't know. Did you ever ask your brilliant brother if, when he was taking data structures, he made mistakes with semicolons?
no, no,
Because I'm guessing he did, Neal, and he was
yeah,
just very persistent because he loved what he was doing. And the reason I ask you this is that my husband has always been angry with himself because he took mechanical engineering in college,
mhm,
which nowadays is very useful. But back then, when EE was the big thing, hardly anybody was doing mechanical engineering. But as part of that, he still had to take a computer programming class. But that was back in the day when you had to reserve time at the computer, and the computer was a gigantic thing, and you had to
mainframe.
get punch cards made and then run them through. You'd take your stack of punch cards down, run it through the computer, and he said you always knew you were in trouble if the readout was only a couple pages long because that meant it had started and then stopped because you missed a semicolon or you missed a
Yep.
period. And then you'd have to take your punch cards back and try to figure out where it was because there was no debugging. I mean, can you imagine what it was like to try to make a program back in those days? And the only way that anybody ever got beyond that was to pursue that thing beyond the semicolon problem because that happens to everybody.
Well, this might feed into something really interesting in my journey in that when I have to take one minor step and then we'll get there related to the syntax problems. The minor step is so COVID hit in March of 2020 and then suddenly we weren't going anywhere, we weren't doing anything and I was like, all right, time to try to learn how to make a game. And so I watched a whole bunch of YouTube videos on that and I narrowed it down to two different game engines because obviously I wasn't writing a game engine from scratch. So the whole idea of a game engine is like the substrate that runs. It's basically a frame, is what it is. Like the game engine tells you, oh, this is going to be oil painting, or this is going to be this, or this is it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the frame that you set that you're then limited by, but that frame gives you a complete tool set so it automatically gives you things like gravity or how to build a 3D object in the world. It's already set up to do that. You don't need the
Mm-hmm.
infrastructure for how a 3D object can exist. So yeah, so I narrowed it down to two different options, Unity and Unreal Engine, which they're still the two major players in the space. And I started trying to learn Unreal Engine. And what's neat about it is it's totally free and you can just download it and just begin playing around. There's lots of people making YouTube videos. Most of them are not very good, but there are some that make excellent tutorials and I just dove in. And where I wanted to tie this back to what you were just saying about the syntax errors is that so within Unreal Engine, now you could write raw C++ and you can do that. but there's a scripting layer that's above that. So you have these layers of code. And I don't even understand, the layers underneath the C++, but obviously you have a compiler and then you have binary that's it gets you have these layers of abstraction that scale upward. So the level that most programmers are at are like the C++ or Java layer or what, and then but within Unreal Engine there's this what are called blueprints, which is a scripting layer. And what that is it's all logic and it's all visual, which that for me was a game changer. So suddenly I could visualize how the logic was connecting. So it's a node to a node to a node to a node. So it's like, I want this to happen, then I want this to happen, then this, and if this, then it does this and this. But if this is true, then da, da, da. So, and just what you were talking about at Northwest Estuary, obviously I wasn't there, but just watching the video about the need to just do it and 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 do it, do it. Like the more I just so in the beginning I was forcing myself to do things, forcing myself. And I would wake up basically an hour early every day and just do it for an hour and then I would go about my normal job. And I did that for probably at least a year. But within that first year, it went from this thing that was annoying that I was dreading to oh, I had a thought or a dream when I was like in the shower or sleeping or something, and like I think I know
Mm-hmm.
how to solve this problem, and da 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 da. Da.
Mm-hmm.
And so that went on for about a year, and then and then as I was starting to actually make progress to the extent that I'm like, I think I could probably make a game. I think I could eventually figure this out because I was able to find. So anytime I had a problem, like think of a problem as a wall visually. I would be tracking along that wall for a few days or sometimes a week, but I would inevitably like find a door and be like, "Oh, there's a door." And then I would inevitably find a key and then, "Oh, there's a key." And I would turn the key and I'd figure out that problem. And so like that happened again and again and again and again. So if that happens like a couple dozen times, you start really believing in whatever process you're doing and it's just a frequency and just being stubborn about it. Um, so after about a year of doing that, I said to myself, like, okay, I think I can make a game. But the problem, it's the same problem with the books, is that like there are a million games that, and not a million, but there's like 100,000 games that are released every year.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the games are not very good. Most of the games are pretty poor. And so the likelihood of me making a game that people notice is negligible. So like how do I even like first of all, why would anyone care about my game? And second of all, like why, what makes me so sure that I'm going to be a better game developer than anyone else, which I'm certainly not because I'm just starting. And but in my actual job, and this is I won't go too much into my personal details, but I went through a period of time where I was training classes for physicians, for doctors. Like I probably trained 2,000 doctors over a couple of years. Like I got really good at, let's say, technical conversations with smart people.
Mm-hmm.
And then Unreal Engine 5 was coming out. Like I knew it was coming out, and I was like, that's it. Like when the new engine comes out, I don't know that much, but I know enough, and I know how to teach, and I know how to teach efficiently. So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna start a series. I'm gonna start a YouTube channel. I'm just gonna teach, and this way, like I'm actually helping people because instead of these kids wasting their time playing other people's imaginations, they should take their own imagination as they're growing up into adulthood, and they should start projecting their own imagination out into the world. And so I started doing that, and I'm a pretty good teacher. I don't know Unreal Engine nearly as well as many experts, but I'm a good teacher. And so it's that combination of like decent knowledge with good teaching that like put my videos at a higher level than a lot. And so I was building up a subscriber base. And then what happened? I reached a certain point in teaching a series because I was basically like building the game I wanted to make while I was teaching the series. And I reached a point where I realized like, oh, I need to restart. Like this game, like the way I'm doing it, I learned enough that it's like I need to restart. So then I wanted to get through like 100 episodes and I was only on episode 70 or so. And I was like, ah, man. So I decided, so have you ever in your life, have you ever been pursuing something that you know it's really useful and important, but you get to a certain point in it and your heart just has left it. Like you're no longer, the passion is gone in that particular endeavor. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would say for me right now, painting is definitely that because
Mm,
I'd been painting for like 20, 20 plus years. And it was my absolute passion. I'd wake up every morning, all the idea came in the night and I know how to fix that problem. And it was on my mind 24/7. But then when I started on this problem and I started this channel, it sucked up all my creative energy, I guess. And I can still paint. I mean, people ask me for a custom piece or something like that. And a while back, I made a piece that was 60 by 80 for a couple who were having their 30th anniversary and they wanted a particular large painting for their living room. So I painted that for them and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it very much. But when I was done with that, I was done. I wanted to come back and do this again because this is I don't know why. This is just the path that I'm on right now. So yeah, I know
yeah.
the feeling.
Yep. And I also maybe about 10 or 15 episodes in, so I was doing an episode a week, and 10 or 15 episodes in, I said like, "Oh, this is growing. I might actually meet some people," because also part of my journey, part of my experience is that I moved to New Orleans shortly after I got married. Didn't really have many friends here. I was involved in my local church, but not many people my age, and so I decided to start a Discord server along with my channel. And we were meeting every Friday evening. And initially, it was really cool. Like people would build things in Unreal Engine and other software too, and they would show what they're doing, and they would kind of present their tips and tricks, like things that they figured out. And we were sort of it was a show and tell basically every Friday. Um, but simultaneously, when all of that was going on, I was listening to like PVK, Paget. Like if I was doing dishes, if I was going on a walk, or if I was like folding laundry or whatever it might be, like I was listening to PVK, Pajot, Vervaeke, like and you and Sevilla King and so many folks that like back then they were all over the place. Now I don't barely see them. Like Andrea with the bangs
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, just man, like it's almost like mythological in my psyche now. Like these conversations that like I had no idea the like the rabbit trail I was going. I was just like starting out with these like very innocent conversations, and then it just went and went and went and went and oh man, I don't know how much I devoured. It was a lot. It was so at the same time, and but what happened as like over time the basically the spirit, the attitude of my Discord server started going south. People joined, overwhelmingly the attitude became, "I need this. Can you help with this? I have this problem. Can anybody fix it?" And it was far less participatory and far more gimme, 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 in the words of Chad,
Mm-hmm.
self-centered. So that was happening, and then simultaneously, I realized I needed to basically start over my concept, and so I decided to shut down the server and decided to end that particular series, and I started another series, and that series was like more of a devlog, like basically this new idea or new way of going about a game, the game that I had, and that went another 6 months, and then I hit the same point with that where it's like, oh, I need to restart again, and so basically we're on round three now, and I've decided, okay, no more videos until I actually have something that could be a game that could be considered a playable game or at least a prototype of a game. So enough teaching, just do it. Like there's nothing else left to do except do it. And
Oh,
that's where I am. Yeah.
is the game based on that story, the original story?
Yes and no. You could think of that story as like a seed where so that particular part of my life is such a weird part of my life. And it's such a and I think you saw my initial conversation with Chad where
Mhm.
I told my story. And I
I
was
can I can put
simultaneous
that
yeah,
in the I can put that in the description section too.
yeah. I was simultaneously the most depressed I'd ever been in my life, and I was also the most creative I'd ever been in my life. And this helped me a lot. So I devoured Peterson's reading list, and one of those books that I'm convinced very few people actually read because it's absolutely massive. It's called The Discovery of the Unconscious, and it's by Ellen Berger, and it's
Oh,
basically a history.
wow.
Yeah, it's a history of Pierre Janet. I think it's Janet because he's French. Obviously Sigmund Freud, um, Carl Jung, and what's his face? Adler. I forget Adler's first name.
Mortimer?
Um,
Not Mortimer.
no. Um,
Different Adler.
yeah. Let's see. Forget his name. But it goes through like almost a chronological historical approach of um, the how psychology first began to understand the subconscious, starting with things like uh, what is it called? What is this called?
Hypnosis?
Hypnosis. That's it. Yes. I have to. So starting with hypnosis and moving on from there. And it was, but anyway, so about that book, uh, they mentioned something called a creative illness. And both Freud and Jung had at one point in their life what they considered a creative illness, which is basically they stayed functional in their day-to-day life. And the by functional, I mean like they did their psychotherapy, they did their rounds at hospitals, stuff like that. But behind the scenes, like their whole frame of reference is being transformed and rearranged and recombobulated, and that's
Hmm.
what was happening to me. Like my fundamental secular materialist frame had been broken, and like in the words of Peterson, like 90% of you might need to be burned away. And that's what was happening to me during that time. And all of that was being burned away or had been burned away. And the creativity is like everything under the sun flying in. And so if I go back to that original writing now, maybe 80% of it is garbage. It's just like
Hmm.
nonsense. It's excessive. But there are glints of gold amidst the garbage. And so
Yeah.
like but you can't in the moment you can't see the gold amidst the trash heap, you could say. But
Yeah.
hopefully now I can go back and I'm like picking those pieces of gold and be like, I have to use this somehow. I have to. And yeah.
When I was 30, just a couple of years before I came to know Christ, I went through a period like that where I started writing music. It was like coming to me. It was just like insane. I have these songs in my head all the time. And I knew how to plunk out a melody on the piano, but I wasn't by any means a piano player. I had played piano in high school, but then I had just walked away from it. So I wasn't very good at the piano, but I had some friends who were musicians, and so they helped me put chords to this music and actually put it on, a reel tape. And I actually got some appointments with music publishers in Nashville and drove down there to meet with them and that kind of stuff. But I remember that feeling of it's like my world was coming apart at the seams, and I didn't understand it at the time, but one of the young men that I knew through some drama that I was doing, because I also did community theater, he said to me, "Well, Karen, you're going to turn 30 in a few months. That's all it is. If you're going to turn 30, and that's why you're going through this thing, this flurry. But the point I wanted to make was these songs that I wrote, I still have them. I still have the sheet music from them. And after I became a believer, I looked back on them and I thought, this stuff is just shallow. It's so shallow. When stuff you think is so deep and profound that after you come to know Christ is just so shallow. But then the other day, I hadn't looked at it for like 20 years. And I sat down and I started to play through some of those songs. And I thought, there's a seed here. I could do something with this. There really is a seed. So, yeah, I know that feeling. It's super interesting. I also remember, well, during that time period, I saw a movie with George C. Scott and Paul Newman's wife. What was her name? Can't remember her name, but she was a
Mm.
famous actress as well. And it was called They Might Be Giants. and it was actually about psychotherapy. It was about these two people that were in a mental institution, and this kind of conspiracy that occurs to them, and then how they kind of acted out in the world. And at the time when I saw that movie, I thought it was the most profound thing I'd ever seen. And then 10 years after I became a believer, I went back and watched it again. And I'm like, this is so stupid, so lame, you know? So, yeah, our whole worldview changes to such an extent that's really interesting. So, anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
No, that's a great story. Yeah, I go back to things that I watched. Like I tried watching Home Alone with my daughter and another movie, and she's 8 now. And another movie called Jingle All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's a
Yes,
bad
I.
movie. Oh, with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sinbad. And like, I was like, these movies are so violent. Like, how did I like this as a kid? They're
Mhm,
just beating each other up the whole movie.
mhm.
Like, I can't. And we turned it off. Like I couldn't watch it. Yeah, it's
Well,
like,
the
how is this
old
PG?
cartoons. I mean, you go back to Roadrunner and all that stuff that we watched when we were kids. The cartoons are so violent,
Yep. Well,
vicious.
so I have a theory about that. We don't have to go down this particular rabbit hole, but I think starting around probably early 2000s, the cinema was a mutual male female thing where families would go, couples would go to the cinema, and then more and more men just drifted into video games. And so let's say the more aggressive tendencies of men had their projection through video games. And so the cinema became a less male, like just the percentage, the influence of men in the cinema went down. And as a result, I think violence in cinema in general went down. This is my theory, that because more male attention went into video games. So we still have our violence, but it's not, and it is communal in that we're playing with other men, but it's like 90% men, especially these games where it's like we work together in teams to like capture a location, blow something up, rescue the this, whatever it is.
Mhm.
And so it's communal, but it's online. And so it's not communal in a physical space that needs to be shared with women. Anyway, so we don't have to pick up that particular,
Well,
but
you,
I do.
you did cause me to reflect on something, though. Did you see that movie that came out? I can't remember if it was a documentary or based on a true story about this kid that became so excellent at one of these video games where you drive a car. What is that? There's these video games
Like
where you,
a racing game,
a racing game, but what is the big most famous race?
Indy 500 or
No, it's one of the ones in Europe,
oh,
Le Mans or
I-
something like that.
Le Mans.
Anyway, one of these teams, actually, one of these car, the sponsors of cars decided to bring together a whole bunch of these young people who had gotten to be the best at this game and see if they could actually drive the cars. And then they had a competition amongst all these ones who had learned on the games actually driving real cars. And the whole thing is about them going through the process of learning to drive these real cars at speed, like 200 miles an hour around a racetrack. And one of them actually ended up becoming a very successful driver in all these races where you make money at it.
Formula One, probably is what you're
It's
Formula One.
yeah, it's probably something like that. Yeah, it's a fascinating movie, just fascinating. And I wonder if all these games that you're describing, where men get together in a team to blow something up or to capture a location, maybe it would be possible to take all of those men and put them in competitions to say, okay, now let's learn to do this in real life so that you can protect your nation, you can protect your community, you know.
Well, that's Grim Grizz's Paintball for Jesus in
Yes,
a
yes, yes,
nutshell.
yes.
That's it. But okay, so my father once made a joke to me, this relatively recently, where he said, I never believed that all the time you spent playing video games would help you in your real job, but it does. Um, and so a lot of people think of video games as a waste of time. And I am firmly convinced that's not the case for a variety of reasons. Uh, I'll just give some surface level examples, but then we'll go deeper and I'll explain why. But so one is that I learned to type fast from video games. But because I was playing my first online games when do you remember when Net Zero was actually free? When internet was like my family was a late adopter to despite the two computers, they were late adopter. We didn't have AOL. So I downloaded Net Zero, which was actually free. This was before the dot-com bubble burst. And the Net Zero had this ad box that you couldn't get rid of. It would like permanently be on your screen. But like kids were clever. We download a hack to get rid of the ad box or hide it. And so I'd be taking up my parents' phone line and be playing StarCraft online with my friends. And what would happen is in the middle of the game, like my mother would pick up the phone and it's like she'd be yelling, Neal, like I have to get off the game. And then anyway, so yeah, I would hack this ad box, and there was no ability to have voice over internet back then. So
Hmm.
a little bit later, there was a program called Ventrilo that would do it. But back then, like they're coming on the left-hand side. Like I would have to actually type in the game to people I was playing with. And the
Hmm.
faster I typed, the better we were as a team at defeating the opponent. So that's how I learned to type quickly. It's from that's just one example. But this idea in the internet of everything's permanent, where our sins are enshrined and encapsulated for all time and recorded, whether it's on Facebook or Instagram or on a video for that matter. Like our sins are enshrined forever here. And in video games, we are interacting with people our age, solving problems. You could say they're make believe problems, but that's not really the focus. That's not really the point. The point of it is that you as an individual are working with other people in a collaborative way to solve a particular goal or problem, and also learning the social skills as, let's say, inappropriate as they often are among young men. You're learning how to interact with that group in a constructive way toward a common goal. And I'm not saying they're a replacement for the physicality in that respect, but th that did. I learned no small part of my social skills from online video games because very quickly you have to learn how to interact with other people in order to achieve a mutual goal. And I do have a history of developing, I won't say close friends to the extent that I have within TLC now, but friends that I feel like I could call up and we could have a conversation about other things that I could, yeah. And so when someone like Grim Grizz says like, no, this is my life, this is I understand it. It's it's a different world. And we can't, and that's part of my dataless mnemonic in that I think the technology is with us. I don't believe that God would allow capabilities within the universe that did not have their proper place and purpose. But it is like stealing fire from the gods in some way, shape, or form. And it is extremely dangerous and daunting at times. And I think I keep the dataless mnemonic because, and it's actually from a video game that I get that name. I am aware of the myth, but it's from a video game initially. But it's there's always the temptation to believe like I'm gonna get away scot-free. I can use this thing. I can do this thing, and I can. And that's been much of my life. I have successfully got away scot-free with sins, let's say. But the dataless myth is like, no, 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 you don't get it. Every single thing that you do, every single sin, it's not you necessarily that gets hurt. It's the people you care about most that get hurt. And that raises the stakes in a whole new way. And that ties, I would say, directly into my Christianity. It's you might say, well, I'm okay, let's say drinking my life away, for instance, or I'm okay with my drug habit. Yes, but are you okay with that in relation to your daughter? Are you okay with that in relation to your family? Are you okay with that? It's the problem as I see it, or the crux of the matter, is that, well, in Peterson terms, is that we are not only responsible for our own sins, but we are responsible for the sins of the world. We are responsible for everything and everyone for all time, which is insane. But it, Nate made this point to me recently in Grail Country, and it was this debate over universalism. It's one of my favorite things to just hit on. We could talk about universalism, but it's this idea that everything's connected. So everything eventually has to be drawn out into heaven and or drawn up into heaven if everything's connected. I I don't know. And this might actually relate to the Boolean float conversation in that that all the way back in the initial thing that we wanted to talk about, in that every piece of data in a video game, every piece of data is basically summarized in one of two ways. It's either a true false, which is a Boolean, yes, no, 0 or 1, or it's a float, which is just a real number, scales up to infinity, can have, lots and lots of decimal places if it's between 0 and 1 or -1 and 1, or it could just be an infinite number. It doesn't really matter. But as I see it, we're playing the game that we're playing, this thing called life. Both of those sets of data are relevant in that if you're not, so let me give an example. If you're not actually playing the soccer game, if you're not one of the 11 players on the field, then you cannot participate in the soccer game. That's the Boolean. You're either in the soccer game or you're out. You're either in or you're out. There is a threshold for participating in the soccer game. But then within the soccer game, then it's qualitative all the way up. You could be, and all the way down, right? So you could take the soccer ball, dribble towards your own goal, and shoot and score and make a goal for your enemy team, your opposing team, right? Or you could be Cristiano Ronaldo or one of the superstars and carry your team to victory. So that there's that quality dimension that you can't measure, like how good of a soccer player the soccer player is, or how good is this, or how good is that. But it only becomes relevant once you're partaking in that particular experience or that particular game.
So then
And
float represents the qualitative side and Boolean represents the quantitative side?
Boolean represents the frame or the game that you're playing. Like what? Yeah.
That Boolean represents the choices and the limits. Well, not would that include the limits?
I don't know. It is the frame. I think of it as the frame in that you have to play the game in order to partake in the rewards and pitfalls of the game.
Okay, and then the
Yeah.
float, the real numbers
Mhm.
represents where you are on any given scale. There's a lot of scales, right?
Yeah.
So you could be scaling up and down or right and left or forward and back. There's a lot of different scales. Where you are on any of those scales is the float aspect.
Yeah, in a video game, inevitably what you're doing as a video game developer, and this goes for any quality game. It could be Tetris, it could be the Pong, it could be the simplest possible game, is that you're reducing reality down to a much smaller subset of whatever reality is. So, and and the reality is basically three things. It's three things. The reality is the agent in a game. It's whatever is acting in the game. Let in Pong. So you can think of. Are you familiar with Pong, which is like
I
the
kind of
go-to
remember.
original? Yeah, or even Tetris. You could think of it.
I don't think I ever knew Tetris. I mean, I was never interested in games, so I didn't pay
Yeah,
much attention. But I do remember when games first came out, when the digital games first came out, and they would have them like in the restaurants. They'd have a game over in the corner, and the kids would go play. I can
yeah,
remember the little thing moving, or
yep,
like Pac-Man eating the thing, What was
yeah.
what was Pong?
So Pong is just two paddles. So basically, like think of them as, yeah, they're just paddles, and there's a ball that bounces, and you also have walls because the screen is basically a frame in Pong,
Hmm.
and the ball bounces off the screen, and it just follows the laws of physics. But there's no gravity, and there's no what's the word? Inertia. There's no resistance in
Okay.
terms of like the ball
No
does not
gravity
slow
and
down.
no friction.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
So like and it's perfect transfer. It simulates a perfect transfer of energy from the wall. So the ball never loses speed, basically.
Mhm.
And all you have to do is you have to position your paddle against an opponent, and the ball bounces. And if you miss, if the ball goes down, then you lose. So you boop, and then it bounces, and then they hit it, and then it comes back, and then boop, and then and then it gets more complicated because you can put things like in the middle of the screen where the ball can bounce off those things, and then it comes back. Um, and so you have it's basically three things. There's the rules and the structure of the arena. Like the rules, if the rules change in the middle of the game and you don't know why or how they changed, people really don't like that. Like that's the equivalent of the Deus Ex Machina in a movie where it's like,
Mhm.
oh, it's just a dream and none of it mattered and da, da, you know.
The end of
Uh,
Lost, yes.
yeah, yeah, no, I did finish Lost for that reason. I got about three-quarters of the way through. Yeah, so you have to still abide by a common rule set. Now you could be clever about it, but if you break the rule set, like if yeah, anyway. Uh, so you have the initial set of rules. That's the frame. And then you are the agent in a game. Like you are playing. And this goes for Monopoly, this goes for everything I'm describing. Any kind of game. This goes for soccer, like any kind of game. So you have the rule set, you have the agent, and the agent's the one making decisions. And that's the key. That's the key about a game that makes it different than any other form of art, is that there's an agent who's making decisions. Um, and then you have and then you have what I'll call emergence in a game. So you have the frame, that's the initial set of rules. You have the agent who's making decisions, and the emergence is the dynamics or the properties within the frame that are changing in relation to the decisions that are being made. Now, maybe it's not fully in relation, but a game is only sorry, a game is good insofar as the how the I have to formulate this right. A game is good insofar as the interior of the game changes in a, let's say, in a way that follows from the agent's decisions, but in a way that's still unanticipated by the agent.
Hmm.
Um, and so if like the best, I keep going back to soccer. Maybe I do that because I get criticized for my American provinciality within the corner sometimes. And so I go football, sorry. So all of our international viewers. But within soccer, like everyone watching the soccer game, they know the rules of the game. Like they know that one team's going to win, one team's going to lose. It's there's going to be goals, there's going to be this. So like why do they care if like one team's going to win and one's going to lose? And oh, and then why do they care when after the game's over, everybody just goes home and it's just a waste of 3 hours of time and also my money. So like why even bother with the soccer game? Um, and well, we could talk about that too, but they care or they now you might say, well, they care about the binding and the well, you might as well have anything then, right? You might as well have I don't know, a speed walking competition that everyone comes for the binding. So like why soccer? Like why? And it's because you have these emergent moments in the game where everybody knows the rules, and yet there's an unexpected wow. Like and it's hard. That's another thing. It's something that the typical person if they've ever tried doing, it's like that's impossibly hard, impossibly difficult. Um, and so all games have that qualitative basically scaling to infinity. The better the game, the higher the infinity that can scale to, if that makes sense. Like you ever hear of a scissor kick or not? What is it called? Bicycle kick, sorry, in soccer. So they actually flip and I am wearing shorts by the way, so I'm okay doing that. But they actually flip and while so the ball is crossing across the field and they do a flip in midair and time the kick while the ball is flying in midair, and they have to put it into the goal. So it's a perpendicular shot, while a ball's moving at roughly 50 miles an hour, and they have to do it in midair with a flip, and
Mhm.
this is a real thing. So it's
Mhm.
like it's acrobatics, but not only it's acrobatics, but it's in a team. Um, in anyway, it's so like you have all these
I
liberties.
think about that kind of thing all the time
Yeah,
in reference to the remarkable capacity of a brain to anticipate location and and um, cause the body to move into the appropriate place at the appropriate time for a purpose. Whenever I hear the scientists go on talking about all their stuff, that it's all just particles in the void. Because, like with my dog, and I've talked about this before, with my dog, I can throw a piece of apple in the air and unerringly she can jump to exactly where it is, even if I throw it in unanticipated places. I'll look one direction and I'll throw it the other direction, and she'll be there and she gets it, and every single time. So there's something in her brain that is calculating trajectories and angles and distances. I mean, just think about the mathematics of that, to be in the right place at the right time. And
just
what
got to
you're
do.
talking about is scaling levels way above that, So, yeah, I mean, there is, in terms of excellence, it does scale to infinity. I really believe that.
Yeah, yeah,
Although infinity is not a real number, right? So that's not
yeah.
in your float. You
Well,
can't have it in your float.
that that's sort of the arena. Well, you sort of can because you can program the arena to so when you set up a float. So the engine that's I should be careful here because the engine probably does have like a maximum number, like a Google, maybe like 100 zeros or something like that. But that's an arbitrary limit set by, let's say, the standard storage limits and limits of computing power, basically. Um, but it's meant I, the game is sort of meant to simulate uh, unlimited. The game is good insofar as it can simulate unlimited excellence. So excellence. So within the gaming community, one of the common phenomena that occur are something called speed runs. So let's say you're excellent at a game and you're showing your excellence to, other people on YouTube or something like that. And so you make a video showing like, hey, I can beat this game in 12 minutes. This game that conventionally takes 10 hours to win, I can beat it in 12 minutes, and you show how you do it. And people are like, wow, like that's legitimate. That takes a lot of skill to do. It's all, all young men doing this, but it's competition. And then you have another guy who's like, I can do it in 11 minutes. Watch, and it scales up. So you have these games that have these speed run communities that like all they do. It's like, you ever see the Rubik's Cube
Mhm.
documentary?
I
It's the
didn't see the
same.
documentary, but I just saw a thing on Twitter the other day that showed if you do these four moves 9 times, it'll solve any Rubik's Cube. Is that real? Is that
Probably.
possible?
I'm terrible with Rubik's cubes. One of my best friends was like, "Oh, it's easy. It's just this," and you could do it in 10 seconds. So that goes back to the mathematical mind that like my
Uh-huh.
brother and my father have. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in terms of this business about the unanticipated moment, I was reflecting back on, I don't know, 10 years ago or something. I was playing Mario with my daughter, and I just had this thought, wow, they've built into this game the anticipation of, have they anticipated all the different possible choices that I could be making as I go along? But it doesn't matter what choice I make, they give me a new landscape with new opportunities that provide for another infinity of choices. And then whatever of those choices I make, it provides another landscape. And it's as though, as close as possible, they're making life. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it's.
very weird feeling.
I think you said two things in there I think are spot on. It is an infinity of infinities because every moment has its own
Mm-hmm.
infinity, and
Mm-hmm.
then it can keep going. Um, so
Well, that's
because of
built,
that,
actually, that's built into real numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, they say
Oh,
that infinity is not a real number, but actual fact is to get from 0 to 1 is an
is an
infinity
infinity.
of infinities,
Yes. Yeah.
right?
And often in games, things are reflected in terms of a normalized float. So you have a normalized between 0 and 1. And so you can, like, for example, if you have a character's smile and the face can only go so far in this direction is a character's smile. So it's like, how much are they going to smile? Okay, that's going to be a number from 0.1 to 1, or sorry, from 0 to 1. And so 0.1 might be a kind of a grin, and a 0.2 might be a smirk. And I'm not even kidding. There, like everything is reflected in these numbers. Now it's not a perfect representation of reality, but it's close enough. And there
Mm-hmm.
was, oh darn it, there was something else you said in that last segment that I really wanted to pick up on. Now I can't remember what it was.
Oh, the landscape keeps opening up to all these opportunities.
I I remembered it, which is you said that the game designers or developers don't even uh, anticipate the ways in which the game could be played.
Mm-hmm.
And that for the best games, for most games, this doesn't happen. But for the best games, that exact phenomena happens, is that there have been multiple recorded instances in game history where someone has discovered or utilized a technique or a strategy that the world had never seen in relation to that game before,
Mm-hmm.
ever. And it's just like, it's not something that the game developers anticipated. And
Mm-hmm.
when that happens, it is that like, whoa moment because you have all these people who have invested all this time and energy into understanding this particular system. And
Mm-hmm.
I think even Magnus Carlsen's done this in chess. So it's not that foreign of a concept. But it's just in the amount of games that are produced these days, that happens fairly frequently. And then what typically happens is the game developers have to do a quick patch to fix whatever they call it an exploit, because someone figured out a way to basically defeat the arena or the systems of the arena to and it's typically considered an exploit because they're taking advantage of some possibility that wasn't foreseen by the creator of the game, and then they have to fix it.
Well, and when you take that to the limit, that's the cross.
Except we except the cross is a feature and not a bug. The cross is the central feature of the game and not the bug.
Yes, but that central feature is something that up until that moment was unanticipated and impossible to have without God's prophetic power working through people. No one would have ever anticipated that anything like that could ever have power in the world, right? So I mean, it's that taken to its limit,
Oh,
and
death, where is your sting?
and there's a whole bunch of the world that thinks it is a bug, and only some of the world that sees it as a feature. So, right?
That that right there, I got to think about that more because that might be a perfect descriptor for Christianity, which is seeing suffering as a feature or the central feature and not a bug.
Well, maybe sacrifice is a better word.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And the reason is that it's suffering on behalf of someone for something higher in Peugeot terms. Yeah.
Well, plus sacrifice has this aspect that it can you can explain everything in terms of sacrifice. You can explain Booleans in terms of sacrifice. You can explain everything in terms of sacrifice because even the smallest choice is a sacrifice. If I make any choice, because every choice is one amongst an infinity of possibilities, any choice that I make, I'm sacrificing the rest. So, and then sacrifice scales up from there.
Yeah. Um, can I ask, because you have talked to so many people in this space, and I'm curious what you think about this. So the origin of sexual reproduction makes I'm about to take this in a very different direction. The origin of sexual reproduction makes a lot of sense to me in that so within economics we have um, you mentioned what in economic terms that sacrifice is called opportunity cost, where you give
Yes.
up everything.
Mhm.
But there's also within economics, and this blew my mind when I understood it within economics because I think it's a game changer. It's trying to remember the term. Um, I should have written this down ahead of time. It's when even if you're better at two different things than I am, so let's say you're better at making both bacon and eggs than I am. Like you can make 10 eggs and 5 bacon, and I can only make 3 eggs and 3 bacon. Um, because because of this thing, it's always better for us to trade, basically,
Mhm.
even if you're better
Mhm.
at both those things.
Right.
Comparative advantage. That's what it's called. Um, comparative advantage. So I still have a comparative advantage making one thing uh, versus another with you. So no, even if a person or an entity is 100% better at all functions than another person or entity, a body, a company, a club, whatever it is, it's still better that they trade. And that's a remarkable thing to me because that means built into the structure of being we have a need, we have a necessity to share our talents, share what we can produce, what we can give with others in all capacities. But the question that I wanted to say to you, so sexual reproduction makes sense to me because from those fundamental laws, I see the sexual reproduction fundamentally emerging out of that. Now, what doesn't make sense to me from, let's say, a pragmatic, practical point of view is how multicellular life arises. Because as I see it, you have to have two cells both willing completely to be self-sacrificial. They have to give up their agency entirely for this mutual well, maybe it's not entirely. Like maybe it's more of a symbiotic start and then they just work together more and more until they're one thing. I guess have you had, this is my question, have you had scientists on that have talked about the origin of multicellular life? And I assume it starts with sexual reproduction, but how does sexual reproduction go from two to they became one flesh?
Well, okay, so I talking about multicellular life, I think that that can be even asexual reproduction is can be multicellular. But let's look at this issue of the two cells. Okay. I think you have to go back a step. To me, you have to go back a step to one cell. How does one cell become a living thing? Because there has to be a choice to live. Has to be a choice to exist rather than not exist. Where the heck does that come from, right? I mean, I have not talked to one single materialist scientist who would be willing to tackle that question head on. They're willing to talk about, oh, well, these chemicals, can come together in this way, or they can do this or that. And there are people like Michael Levin, who I highly regard, and I wouldn't call him a materialist in any sense. He definitely knows that there is something. He's very Platonic minded, but he wouldn't see things the same way that we see things. He says that like the human body or any highly developed multicellular or entity is actually composed of many different entities. So like I have this whole bacterial colony in me, and then I also have the colony that makes up my blood, and I have the colony that makes up my heart, and I have the colony that makes up my liver, and I have the colony that makes up my sexual organs, and that they all came together to make a body. Now that makes no sense to me. If I'm looking evolutionarily, how on earth, what are they talking about when they talk about that? I mean, if you actually think about it, the idea is that so there was one cell, and then that one cell somehow made common cause with some virus that then becomes the mitochondria in the cell and then expands the cell's capacity, and then maybe some bacteria come in and that extends the cell's capacity, and that somehow that cell then, once the cell becomes self-sufficient enough, it divides into two cells, and one of those then becomes a heart cell and one becomes a liver cell. I mean, the whole thing, that just makes no sense to me at all. But I love taking it back to economics. And on Thursday, the YouTube will come out between Ben Lyons and Marcus Shera, both of whom are economists. And Ben Lyons actually had a conversation with Michael Levin about economics and cell biology and the overlap. Because I mean, I've been fascinated in that idea for a long time. So to see somebody actually get out there and talk about it. So you have two cells, and you're thinking about opportunity cost, and then you have to think about, I think, also enlightened self-interest, which is another part of, like, at least free market economics. I think there is an economic structure in the universe, regardless of what name you want to put on it, that is reality, right? You're talking about comparative advantage being showing that within this universe, there is a necessity to share what we can. Okay.
Within any system.
Within any system, there's a necessity to share what we can. And the beautiful part of it is that it doesn't have to be altruistic. Because if it did, we wouldn't have anything, because we're broken. Our souls are broken. So we don't have it within us to be altruistic. But the system will work even without that. And that's exactly what enlightened self-interest is. That you can call it enlightened self-interest, or you can call it greed, whatever you want to call it. But my greed prevents your greed from overwhelming me, because I'm only going to pay as much as I'm going to pay for a given thing that I want to pay. And if you have something that you want to sell me, you have to sell it at the price that I'm willing to pay, or we have to negotiate, and we have to end up, if we're in a free system, we have to end up where we're both happy. That something like that has to happen at the cell level. If there's two cells cooperating, they each have to get something, or they're not going to cooperate.
But it's sort of a choice. The way you were describing life being a choice, to say this collection of molecules, this collection of chemicals chooses to live. So in order for two cells, this is why I am obsessed with the first question too, which I agree is just so profound. But the two cells, like, to basically say, I am not me, like I am dying to self. I'm trying to make a pun there. And I'm giving that agency to this new body. Like I understand enlightened self-interest all the way up to the point of, let's say, death. You know, it makes sense all the way up to the point of, like, oh, I'm dying. Now I think the evolutionary biologists would say, well, you're preserving your genes. That's what you're doing. You're preserving them to the next generation or whatever. I find that argument insufficient.
Well, yeah. I mean, because what you're doing is you're providing an immense amount of agency and consciousness to that cell to be able to say, I will sacrifice myself so that the entity can go on. But that's exactly what happens in our bodies all day long. We're always losing skin cells and heart cells and liver cells. They're always dying so that new ones can, if they didn't die, everything would get clogged up as the new ones are being created in order to keep the body new and fresh and functional. So there are all kinds of cells that have to die, and they're still cooperating together, knowing that they're going to have to die. Plus, I mean, just the thing of two cells coming together and communicating through the ion channels. Well, so Michael Levin was having this conversation the other day with these two guys, and one of the guys is an ecologist. And he, because of ecology, has started really thinking deeply about this stuff. And in the whole ecology frame, he was talking about Mount St. Helens. And he said, so here's Mount St. Helens. I have two thoughts in my head right now, and I don't want to lose the other one. The other one has to do with the cells. Well, maybe it'll come back to me while I'm talking about Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens blew up back in what,
1982, I think, or 81.
1982. Okay.
Yeah.
So there was nothing but volcanic rock left after, and nothing can grow in a volcanic rock. And yet here we are. It's completely reconstituted. Nobody went in there and did anything. It now has got trees and forests and a perfect ecology again. He said, how does that happen? He said, it's as though there's something in the volcanic rock that's calling out, saying, I have here for you all of the nutrients that you're going to need to flourish, but we have to cooperate together for you to try to get started here. And that will break up the volcanic rock in a way that you can put your roots down. It's almost like they have to talk to each other in order to make this happen, because it isn't anything that can happen just from the side of the plants themselves. Not like a seed can just fall on that rock and then, and how does the universe know which seeds have to fall on that rock and which ones will flourish there and which ones won't? And so he's thinking all this stuff through. And at the same time, he's talking to Michael Levin about the cells and how the cells are have to communicate with each other through these ion channels. And then he began to describe how, as a, let's say, for example, a human body is differentiating from the blastula, that there are something like 200 different kinds of cells in the human body, but it starts with one cell. And then that cell event is 2, 4, 8, 16. And then at that point, it creates this like 50 cell glob or something. At that point, they start to differentiate. I mean, that is like the mystery of mysteries, how they talk to each other and decide, you're going to go over here and become a neuron, you're going to go over here and become a lung cell. And to me, the other mystery thing is there's this scientist named Anna Soto who works with the environment that the cell is in. And a cell that might ordinarily be a neuronal cell, if it's in a certain other kind of environment in the body, will turn into a muscle cell. Or a muscle cell can translate into a neuron cell if it gets into a different kind of environment. If the environment is viscous or if it's more solid, that makes a difference as to how the cell differentiates. So it isn't just the level of the cell, it's what is above the cell that's informing the cell how to develop. And these levels go all the way up. And then that all ties into the whole thing of the placebo effect, that it's actually the mental state that's affecting the whole body. So everything levels up. And I'm assuming it does the same thing in a game, right? That the lower levels aren't, it isn't the lower level choice that's determining everything that happens. There's an upper level that's coming down and informing the lower level, right?
It should, in order, like the worst games, well, I shouldn't say the worst games, but bad games occur when it's like Lost, where you got a great story and it's building up, and then where are we going with this? Nowhere. And it just keeps collapsing down. And so there are games like that where it starts out really strong and you can tell that they ended, that they ran out of ideas along the way. But you're right, the best games. Um, okay, so one of the most influential games I ever played. It came out in 2000. It's called Deus Ex, and it takes place in, I think, the year 2045 or something like that. And there's a virus that has been unleashed upon the world
Yes, of
where
course.
there is no cure, where there's a continuous dose of this drug called ambrosia that people have to take to stay ahead of the gray. It's called the gray death, and the and this game. So you are a bioengineered creation, not human, not machine, and you play as like a secret agent trying to uh let's say, thwart the separatist forces within the United States. You could say, and you play, but I'll do some spoilers, but within this game, you switch sides inevitably. And at the very end of the game, you have a choice whether you merge with the machine fully and become basically a AI human hybrid god that rules the planet, or you stay human and become more of like an invisible hand ruling the planet. I forgot the third option. I'm trying to remember. And so like everything builds up towards but you do basically the best option is you have to sacrifice your individuality for something higher. Like you but it's dying to self in like the transhumanist sense of the word.
Mm.
And that as a 15-year-old boy, this like I was on board. I was like, man, this is science technology. It's pointing us to the future. We're gonna have a better era, less suffering, more happiness, more joy. Yeah, let's go. Like I was a transhumanist. I have got transhuman tattoos on my I won't go. Yeah, like I was full in. Anyway, so but yes,
I have a quick question. When you were
yeah.
feeling that way,
Mhm.
did it ever occur to you that in order for that kind of thing to happen, that there's going to be somebody who's making the choices that isn't you? I mean, that there's going to be somebody that is designing or driving that thing that you think you're moving towards that um,
Yeah.
that's going to limit your options, or did you think that this was going to create unlimited options?
I would say more in the latter in my naivete. And it's
Mhm.
because that what I didn't realize is even in that transhumanist frame, I was taking a fundamental leap of faith, which is the leap of faith that like science, technology, the more we have, the better it is. That things trend in a better direction. Basically, the Steven Pinker uh, way of thinking. You know,
That
that
it's
there's that we
benevolent, that it's going to be benevolent.
yeah, well, that history follows a trend. We don't know why it follows that trend, but it's just going to keep following that trend, and inevitably, like um, science and technology is going to lead to utopia, or if not an outright utopia, but what I realized is that so okay, here's a thought experiment. So imagine technology is like a genie in the lamp scenario, where you get the lamp, but you have unlimited wishes. You could wish for whatever you want. And so the end result of that, if you really think about that, the end result of that is that there's two end results. One is that if it's all about you, then you're gonna create your perfect world for you, where everything is in, let's say, compliance or in adherence to your principles, your desires, your interests, and everything around you serves you, whatever that is. Um, and So that means that any real person that would potentially harm me or disagree with me or could potentially even interfere slightly with that utopic vision, any real person needs to be excluded from that because that would diminish the true, secret, sacred Neal in all of my glory as I wish forward the perfect future for me. So, so that's one possible future with technology. And I anticipate we'd be somewhat isolated and separate from each other in that future. And then
Yeah,
you have a and then you have no, but seriously, like this is what's happening. You know, this is we're in the process of conducting this experiment over time. And then you have another future, which what life is actually about is that self-sacrifice toward others. And what it's actually about is the self-sacrifice toward others who actually experience and phenomenological agents, you could call them. And then what happens is like the lamp is meaningless insofar as it's not helping me assist others in their suffering, in their meaninglessness. So then the adventure becomes, and actually I'm giving away part of my game idea here, but it's fine. But the adventure becomes, ooh, how do we break into other people's lamps and show them, hey, this is the true gold. this is the true thing that's glinting. It's not here. You're going to be stuck in your own thing unless you can imagine that this is not the thing. So if you're if the human imagination is our God, then we are in our hell. If God's imagination is our God, then it's infinitely scalable.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that. So if I'm designing my own game, that has to be inevitably reciprocally narrowing, right?
Yes.
Because if I'm designing a world in which all my desires and needs and everything are going to be met, then I am not being challenged or growing in any way. There's nothing anticipated in my life. It just becomes narrower and narrower and narrower until there's nothing left of my life. Um, and and so that is maybe that's a world based on fear. That if I allow anything outside my little world that I'm creating, then I am going to stumble into fear. And fear rules pride and envy. But if I'm going the other way into reciprocally opening, then my life is going to be marked by gratitude and humility because gratitude and humility are subject to love. So that love is always providing that reciprocal opening that broadens the adventure of life um, and I think it's really important to be careful when we talk about self-sacrifice being at the center of things that we understand that self-sacrifice is not the maudlin sacrifice of the devouring mother. I do everything for you, you know, and that self-sacrifice is more of um, I am I am privileged. I am blessed to have the opportunity to serve and to love others because of the love that propagates out of that grows everybody in love and even that can even become self-serving. I mean, the world is full of possible deceptions.
But I loved I think it was Sam Tiedemann on your channel who said something like it's something like evolution is calling us into our final telos or a final form. Like we are being pulled forward more so than pushed from behind. And maybe our job is the road to Emmaus to just walk with others on that being pulled forward. Like we can either thwart or it's not like God isn't going to make his plan. This is the thing in a game. It's like the game has already been created by the time it's released, by the time it comes out. There's already the telos of the game, whatever it is. The good games have multiple ways in which you can cooperate with that telos toward that end. And you would think that the best game has an infinity of infinity ways in which you could cooperate with the telos. And so the question I would ask any young man, any person for that matter, is like, what role do you want to play in this game? And regardless of whether you might say it's not a game, it's real life. Well, that's even that the stakes are way higher than. But it's like, what role do you want to play? Oh, I don't have any free will, so it's not up to me. It's like that's not a particularly good role. You're just choosing by saying, it's not up to me or I don't have any free will. Um, and so, regardless of, I don't want to get into a free will debate, but like we are presented with the illusion of choice. And at least in my own experience, when I make poor choices, I have bad consequences to those poor choices. Um,
Mhm.
and I have found that when I focus my attention, and that attention, that's maybe where the love stems from. Like what am I attending to, or what am I focusing on? Because that's where your treasure lies, there your heart will be also, or where your eyes are looking, something like that. Yeah, that's been my own experience.
Well, the one thing I would say about Sam's comment, and at the time I didn't say anything because I didn't really want to get into a long discussion about that, but if we think of evolution as pulling us forward, then we're thinking of it. I think it was Wolfgang Smith who talked about that the way modern scientists talk about evolution, it's as though they've taken a staircase and flipped it on its side so that everything is progressing forward towards some sort of a goal. But the evolutionists don't really want to talk about a goal, except that the goal is whatever evolution is drawing you towards. But so this is the problem with something being progressive, is that it's horizontal, but you have to really flip the staircase back up and say, um, we are all, and Sevilla and I have had a number of conversations about this, that there's some way in which we're being called upward into quality or excellence or beauty, or you talk about the transcendentals, the float theory of transcendentals. So we're all being called upward into this beauty. Now, part of that being called upward is playing the game, because part of what happens when we play the game is that we grow. We fail and we learn from our failures and we grow. We stress our bodies and we grow. We learn from that stress and we grow. So we're always being pulled upward into this world of the transcendentals, because that is the real telos, that we are drawn towards goodness, that we are drawn towards beauty, that we're drawn towards truth, because that's where he dwells. So I dislike the idea of progress, but I love the idea of being drawn upward. So I guess that would be my one comment about that.
And
And in
we
the
kind of
game,
have
what would
oh,
that be? That the game players, they they keep moving towards wanting to win, because it's in the moving towards winning that you are learning. But at the same time, there must be some movement towards becoming more like the author of the game somehow. Would that make
yeah,
sense in game
no,
theory?
totally. So you have to take a leap of faith in playing a game that the author of the game made a worthwhile production that's worth experiencing. And I know those people who will read the last chapter of a book first to
Mm-hmm.
see if it's worth reading, and that's kind of defeats the purpose, right? So in some ways we could read Revelation first, but then we're the most perplexed after reading Revelation. We have no idea what to expect from the story. And so God in Revelation, I think, is a mad genius in making Revelation the way it is. Um, but I anticipate that regardless of whatever's in Revelation, that our own ends, each of our own ends, and the end for everything will inevitably be that twist of surprise, that magical twist, going back to the
Mm-hmm.
the soccer player, that still makes sense in the confines of the story, but it's just wow, something that we could never anticipate. Um, so going back to the game, um, do you remember there used to be these books called Choose Your Own Adventure books. When I was a kid, we had those where it would be like, if you choose this, then turn to page 34. If you
Oh,
choose this, turn to page 16. Do you remember that?
we didn't. I never saw that, but it
You never
sounds
have that.
great. Sounds great.
Yeah. So there were some of those books that I had as a kid, and the problem with that is you're still limited by the medium, which is the pages. So unless you have a volume that's like this, a
Mm-hmm.
1,000 pages, it basically exponentially increases the complexity of the
Oh,
book.
sure.
So you can't really do that. But in a system, so a game is basically a system, and you can run a simulation. So the difference between like a simulation, so let's say I want to simulate like flooding in New Orleans, and I want to have a reflected, this much rainfall and this da, 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 and have a simulation. The difference between a simulation and a game is in the telos of the simulation, you could say. It within the game, within the simulation, all you care about is the end. Basically the data points, like these are my inputs, these are the outputs. All I care about is about the output relative to the inputs. In a game, you do care about the output. You do care about the final end of the game, but you care way more about the phenomenological experience of the gamer within the game. So
Hmm.
there's this whole qualitative layer to a game that is unnecessary for a true simulation that it's way more complex because you also have to build in the phenomenological experience of the agent who's participating within the simulation. And so like to the extent that a game is good, yes, it does have a really great ending, but it's not the ending that makes the game. It's the entire experience. It's the entire
Hmm.
journey, the ups and the downs and the backs and the forwards and the twists
Hmm.
and the turns. So,
Yeah, because I'm guessing if you could game the game in the sense that every step that you took was a winning step, it would be super boring.
yeah, I mean, that's basically an addiction because then you just need a greater hit. You need more of the same thing to achieve the same result.
Hmm.
And that happens in games where people are addicted to, to certain games. But
Hmm.
that really is the nature of an addiction. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's part of what we've come to as a nation when we, well, and maybe this is the inevitable outcome of the falling more and more towards socialism again, is this idea of being addicted to the outcome, that all we care about is the outcome. And therefore, everybody should have an equal outcome because then that's the way to be good to everybody. But if everybody has an equal outcome, then nobody grows and nobody learns. And, there's no space for joy or service or, it just flattens everything. So if you're addicted to just the outcome in a game, well, in a sense, this is probably me because I have this real problem if I'm watching a movie or a TV show where I can sense it's going south. The minute I can sense it's going south, I either stop watching it, and it's gotten worse as I've gotten older. I just avoid that kind of stuff. So, like Michael Scott in The Office, I can't watch it because every episode I can tell the minute it's going to go south, and but if it's a movie and I'm invested in it, I'm sitting there watching it with my husband and he wants to watch this movie and I sense it going south, I have my iPad on my lap and I'll look it up on Wikipedia and I'll look at the ending of the movie and I'll determine whether or not I'm going to be able to manage the feelings that I have while that thing is going south and whether or not it's going to have an ending that I can tolerate. So I'm addicted to the outcome. It's a bad thing. I need to retrain myself, really.
But I've noticed, I mean, I've noticed this problem within myself too. My attention span is not as good as it was 10 years ago. It's, I don't know what to think about that. Uh, on one hand, I sort of assure myself, oh, you can still read and I can, but I primarily only read books when I'm on a flight because on a flight I'm sort of narrowly limited
That's me
and
too. Yeah.
yeah. Now part of me, and this is gonna sound awful, part of me is like, no, you should try to strike up a conversation with the person next to you on a flight or at least be open to it. And I have done that from time to time. And some of them have actually been okay conversations. But can I talk about the advent of multicellular life with my plane friend? Can I talk about how games as a phenomenological experience are so closely related to our the reason that games are exist is because they emulate or mirror our actual experience. I can't talk about that with, in Fight Club terms, a single serving friend. So
Yeah. 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 Which is where sacrifice comes in. Now, probably your seatmates are super happy when you don't start a conversation, but I think, I mean, I know they're super happy when I don't start a conversation. But if someone did start a conversation with you, the sacrifice would come in being willing to have that conversation instead of being stuck in your book, right?
mhm.
The other way that I can read is if I read just a few pages at a time in the morning when my brain is still fresh. If I sit down in the afternoon and try to read, I get so distracted. I you know,
See that 1 hour in the morning for me is that's when I almost always do my best game development work.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah.
So well, you just need to fly more often. But really, if you went through that book, the Discovery of
Discovery
the
of the
Unconscious by
unconscious.
Ellen Berger, you were doing
Yeah.
pretty good. I
Yeah.
could read much better when I first started with the whole Jordan Peterson thing because I read through Maps of Meaning
Yep.
and 12 Rules for Life and Beyond Order and I read The Master and His Emissary, and I read a whole bunch of scientists on different things. I was reading like crazy, but in the last year or two, I've just become I think I've become a little bit addicted again to screen time. I'm spending more screen time than I was, and then I get distracted, and then it's easier to pick up the iPad than it is, excuse me, than it is to read a book. And that's very frustrating because I know I get a lot more out of reading a book. Because reading a book kind of rewires my brain where it helps me to remember, put things back together again, where reading like stuff on X or something just makes my brain go off in this entropic no man's land. So I've been thinking a lot about the difference or the opposition of memory and entropy. So maybe we could leave it there and talk again sometime because we've been going for well more than an hour and a half. So
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I have a hard out at the top of the hour here, but
yeah.
I wanted to leave one last thing for you, and it's related to one of the things you just mentioned, which is growing, and and this is maybe something that we could talk about it. Hopefully, we have the opportunity to talk again. But what I realized is the game experience. We think of games as this trivial thing that's meaningless because we come out and the game itself is over and nothing happened, and but that's not true because what's changing in a game is the agent. What's
Mhm,
actually what's leaving the game different from how it went in is the agent who's participating in the game. And
mhm.
that also, I think, is the answer to. Did you watch the recent Matthew Peugeot video where he like popped up suddenly and he talked about what he's been thinking of? This was maybe 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. The
Yeah, I
video came
watched
out.
I
Yeah.
watched like two-thirds of it, I think. I didn't have time to finish the whole thing, but I watched a lot of it. Yeah.
Okay. Like he's talking about the holding pattern. And
Mhm,
what I realized in the holding pattern is the agent is changing in that. So
mhm,
so although a person might feel stuck in a holding pattern, what's
mhm,
being done is the pressure or the
mhm.
inability is actually changing the agent. So anyway.
Yeah, well, I was watching a few Dallas Willard conversations this morning, and he talks a lot about transformation and how that all functions in terms of the will and the soul and super interesting stuff. But and now I just what did you just say?
That what's changing in
Oh,
the
in
holding pattern,
what's changing
if
in the holding pattern
is
and
the
Matthew
agent.
Peugeot and yeah, okay.
Mhm.
So in the difference between here's where I'd like to understand the difference between a game and like a story. With a story or with a painting, you have Dorothy Sayers' tripartite structure of idea, energy, and power. So I guess this would relate to the game developer, that the idea is there, and then the energy is all of the thinking and the process that you have to go through and the tools that you use to develop the game. And then that's the energy expressed through time until the game is finished. Then the power is the power that the game has in the world to influence individuals who play it or to influence people who might build other games based on it. It has a power in the world. And so she likens this process like for an idea of a painting, and then I would use paint and canvas and tools and time and energy to produce a painting for a purpose. And at the end, the painting should represent the original idea even more fully than the original idea was. Maybe not as full because maybe the idea is more perfect than the final result can be. But that's like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The Son is the working out in the world of this idea, and then the power is the Holy Spirit is taking that idea and working that idea throughout everybody. So that's the power of the idea in the world. But when you play a game, you're just in the energy part of that. So the idea was not your idea, it's somebody else's idea. You're in the working out space. And then when the game is over, it's over. There's no power in the world unless I guess it would just be whatever transformation took place in you while you're playing the game that becomes the power in the world.
Yeah, it's we could definitely talk a lot more about this, but I, as a game developer, you inevitably have to think about God number one and God number two in PvK speak, which is God as arena, God as agent. And so you can think of God as agent as, okay, what's the perfect way to play this game? But even that is full of pitfalls because depending on the game structure, you're as the designer or developer, you probably have a general good sense of what's the best way to play, but you're opening it up to endless possibilities of of the ingenuity of other people to try out other things. So a game like Minecraft where you can just do endless permutations of building things. I'm sure you've probably seen or heard some things in Minecraft, but you could build a full-on computer within the Minecraft space. It's kind of ridiculous. Kind of, it's like anyway.
So
But
Minecraft
yeah,
would be Turing complete.
I think so.
Wow.
I,
Wow. Wow. That's
I
so
don't,
interesting.
yeah, I don't know how to define that, but there are people who have built like mile high computers because each block
Uh-huh.
is like 1 meter by 1 meter.
Uh-huh.
So, but they've made like a 64-bit processor in Minecraft. Yeah.
Very cool. Let's do that. Let's schedule something for maybe December and we'll talk
Cool.
about Arena Agent and Dorothy Sayers' tripartite world and how that plays out in game theory.
If there's any more that you have on Dorothy Sayers, that tripartite world,
Uh-huh.
if you send that to me, that'd be really helpful because I don't know too
Okay.
much. I've heard you say that, but I'm
Uh-huh.
still I can't distinguish between power and energy. So
Oh, okay. Well, the energy is how the thing becomes instantiated
mhm,
in the world. And then the power is once it is instantiated, how does it affect the world?
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's probably some way that that overlays onto game development because if you look at a game, the building of a game as a work of art, then
Mhm.
it's gonna overlay on that. I might just send you the introduction, which was written by Madeline L'Engle.
Mm.
She wrote the introduction, and it's a very good introduction. It lays
Mhm.
out kind of the basics of the idea. So,
Okay. Sounds great.
okay,
Thank you,
have
Karen.
a great
It
day.
was
We'll talk
great
again
meeting you
soon.
virtually.
Yeah. Bye bye. Same
Bye bye.
here.